I would say actually the best one was probably the Winchester Passion, the first one.
The Winchester Passion?
Yes, for a number of reasons, but again, going back to what James says, it was a 2-year process to plan, and we were involved at the beginning of the 2-year process. So all of the planning and all of the preparation, including where the scenes were going to take place, how they were going to be done, how the crowds were going to move, all of that stuff, the technical people were involved with. Ultimately, with that one, I wasn't involved with every aspect of the technical side of things, but, for example, we pulled off miracles that even the BBC didn't understand how we did it. We had the BBC crews down there who were questioning us, saying, how did you transmit video and sound across the whole city without using big vans and receivers and satellite dishes and all that? It was because people were involved 2 years before and they had time to plan. They could go up and test things, try and see whether it worked or not, months before, rather than turning up on the day and finding out it doesn't work and then Jesus can't be heard. So that was probably the best one. Apart from anything else, there was a terrific crew involved. Jesus was wonderful. But, there was a really good crew involved. But I was saying to James earlier, when we had the first volunteers meeting, if you like, where people were invited to come in, there was something like 350 people turned up to volunteer to help. And bear in mind, this is a production we were aiming for 5,000 people to come to. We ended up with 12. We were aiming to spend 250,000 on it. We ended up spending 150. So it was a big project in that sense. But we still had volunteers. And at the beginning of it, of those 350 people, we had one person who signed up for the technical. And I wasn't even supposed to be involved. I was just consulting. Basically, they had people who were designated as technical directors or whatever. But we managed to actually bring it around by introducing a structure that worked for a large project, a management structure that worked. And individual people then had designated responsibility to bring people in. And I was able to bring in a crew to do certain bits of the power, and another person brought in crew to do certain aspects of the sound and so on, which again saved a huge amount of money. Because over that period of years, you were able to spend time training people who perhaps wouldn't otherwise have the skills to do it. So instead of paying a huge crew of electricians to run out power, I had 2 electricians and a whole bunch of people who had been trained, who didn't cost anything. So there's a lot of ways that getting in at the beginning can actually make a big difference. As James was saying, one of the aspects, of course, is that directors often have wonderful ideas of how they're going to do things. And it sounds great in principle. But when you actually come to doing it, something simple could cost you 20 grand if you really wanted to do it. And you don't find that out until the last minute, and then all of a sudden you've got to change the whole way in which you're running your production 3 weeks before it's due to go on, rather than actually finding that out 2 years before. So there's a lot of things that, even just getting advice from technical people early is a handy thing to do. I mean, the camera crews, for example, where you're going to sight them. I've had so many occasions when we've been told, this is what the play is going to be, you can put a camera there and you can put one there. And you're thinking, that ain't going to work. We're not going to get this, you're not going to pick things up. But by then it's written in stone, they've got the planning permission from the council or whatever. Do you know what I mean? Of course, the other thing is as well, and this is going back to the council and planning permission, you often find that council people, health and safety people come down very hard on churches and organisations that are running events because they see very early on that the people involved don't actually have the skills to do what they're saying they're going to do. So they're talking about running out power and lights and sound and microwave relays or whatever, but there isn't actually somebody who's talking to the council who's qualified to do that. So they're even harder on you than they would be if there was somebody there who knew what they were doing or had the qualifications. Very often I'll go in there and I'll show them a list of certificates and they just leave me alone. But that's okay 2 years before, it's no good 3 weeks before. So.
Can you hear the enthusiasm? He's talking about 2 years of being willing to research to make this project work. I know that there are a lot of directors who just don't assume that they have that interest. But this is their passion. For some reason they love cables and plugs. And
I do fall out with them sometimes. The worst one, I think, was last year, the Abingdon Passion. The play was wonderful, but as those of you who did one last year will know, the weather was dreadful. The problem was with that, we didn't know exactly what the weather was going to do. So a lesson learned from our side, if you like, we talked about the fact that you've got to get involved early and get everything organised early. Well, we changed everything the day before because they weren't sure what the weather was going to do and whether we could have it indoors or outdoors, and ended up going for a split event with half of it indoors and half of it outdoors, which split the equipment down the middle and caused all kinds of, yes, James has got a look on his face already. So where things worked absolutely beautifully in rehearsals the day before, we had a few technical issues, shall we say, on the day. So another thing which I'd advise is, doesn't matter what the weather's going to do, the cast and crew are already aware that they might get wet. People will still turn up. Plan it for where you're going to plan it, do it the way you're going to do it, and unless you have a hurricane and the whole world stops going, stick with what you've planned.
Lovely, thank you.